Yeah, thank you guys all for being on. This is, like I was saying a little bit earlier, this has been a pretty well uh, received event and topic so far. So it's going to be exciting to see everything that comes out of it. For those of you who don't know, we have been working diligently along with the Fly Salem committee to bring commercial air service to Salem. So this has been a topic that's been huge for our business community and for our region as a whole. We've got a great slate of speakers. We're also going to be touching base a little bit on an update on the infrastructure bill that has been dominating the headlines over in DC. And Ed Mortimer from the U.S. Chamber should be joining us soon to give us an update on that and kind of where that stands. First, we're going to have Jack Penning give his presentation on kind of where we're at right now and talk about the positive aspects of having commercial air service here in Salem. And I got a little preview of the presentation. It's pretty awesome. So for those of you who don't know, Jack Penning, for almost 2 decades, has been considered a leading expert in air service development, strategic business planning, and airport marketing. In 2017, Jack joined 3 other partners in founding Valair Aviation Consulting. Today, Valair has 9 team members and works with more than 100 airports in North America. Jack is well known and respected by airline network planners. His business cases for new service has led to the initiation of more than 50 new routes since Valair's founding. In his career, Jack has helped to recruit service to more than 150 underserved routes around the world. A mark of success of 84% of routes Jack recruited in his career are still operating. Before moving to consulting, Jack was an aviation reporter for KGW TV, the NBC affiliate in Portland, Oregon. He was honored with both Emmy and Edward R. Murrow awards for his journalism. And we're so lucky to have Jack join us today to give everybody an update about where we're at. So Jack, it is all yours, my friend.
Thanks very much. Now I just have to live up to that bio, which is always fun. But I appreciate it. Everybody knows at least my background. I'm just up the road here in Portland. Been in Oregon for almost 25 years. Been consulting for almost 20. Doing exactly what we're trying to do here in Salem, which is recruit air service to an underserved market. And we've obviously had a lot of success. Actually, since the pandemic began, our firm Valair has recruited over 50 routes. So we've seen a complete shuffle in air service that's created new opportunity. It's also had an impact on what strategy we're taking specifically in Salem to recruit service. So having said that, I don't want to kill you with PowerPoint this morning, but it's important to make a few points that I have that I show you some data. It's easier to visualize if we look at it in charts, and so we'll do that this morning. So bringing airline service to Salem, I want to talk about where the airline industry is today, and kind of the way capacity is being reallocated and the challenges that airlines are dealing with, and we're trying to help them navigate. Talk about our potential for success, market size relative to communities that have air service right now, and kind of how we fit into what airlines are trying to do. I want to talk about the environmental impact, because I think it's important to point out that with some of the things that we're recruiting, we actually will reduce CO2 emissions quite a bit by having service at Salem. And then the competitive marketplace, what other communities are doing, and just the sheer volume of other communities that are putting together incentive programs to bring air service, realizing that air service is an economic development tool and not just something to take people on vacation. So I want to go through all of those things, and I'll try to do it quickly because I know we all have a million things we want to get doing as our day goes on, but I want to make sure that we cover the big ones this morning. So industry in the pandemic. You're going to see a lot of charts. Don't worry too much about the numbers on these charts. What I'm trying to do is show trends, and you'll see the trend lines to the right of this chart are all pointing down. What that shows us is demand is waning again. Now, some of that we expected because we're post Labor Day and business travel hasn't come back very strongly, nor did we expect it to. We peaked at about 88% of 2019 demand in June. Since then, we have seen demand declining. So we saw demand decline during the summer because of the Delta variant. We're at about 76% of where we should be in terms of the number of passengers traveling. That doesn't sound too bad, but when you think about it, airlines need to run at around 82% full in order to make money. So we're still a long way from our carriers making money. You look at Portland capacity. In 2019, that was the all-time peak for Portland. There were 24 million seats at PDX in 2019. This year, even with an uptick towards the end of the year, Portland will have lost 30% of its capacity. So only 17 million seats being flown at PDX this year. What that tells me is more than just demand is down. It tells me that the entire Willamette Valley is not being served as effectively as it could be. And there's an opportunity to replace those seats at places other than Portland. And that's really where Salem's opportunity comes in. We can reallocate or help airlines to reallocate capacity in a way that will better serve the mid-Willamette Valley by ensuring that people who live near to Salem don't have to drive as far to get on flights to go where they're going. You look at Portland's nonstop service. Portland has lost nonstops in 31 markets. So all of these cities you see here no longer have a nonstop on out of Portland on any airline. So it's a huge loss of service that Portland has seen. As of last January, Portland had lost about 21 nonstops. So airlines have continued to permanently cut service. You look at the challenges we face before the pandemic, and then now we're calling this post-pandemic. We're not really through it, but what we will see as we come out of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we had a pilot shortage that was created just by the mere fact of more aircraft flying than there were people to fly them. Now, what happened was airlines so aggressively offered early retirement buyouts to their pilots, and so many thousands of pilots took those early retirement buyouts that as airlines try to bring planes back into service, there's no one to fly the planes they've already parked. And so essentially the reactivation of airline networks has been incredibly difficult because there just are not enough pilots. There's a high barrier to entry to pilot training. You need 1,500 hours of experience. That's around between 4 and 5 years of experience before you can fly a commercial aircraft. So pilots who are starting training now will not even be activated until 2026 or 2027. So this is going to be a huge challenge for the next several years. Before the pandemic, we had a shortage of gates. Now, the problem is the way the airlines have compressed schedules. It's hard to get connections that are adequate. You'll see it in almost every hub. Seattle, Alaska is a great example. They have retimed all of the flights in the hub so that they work for the local Seattle traffic, and they don't have as many connecting flights there. What it means is you may sit on the ground for 4 hours waiting for your next flight on your connection. So getting the schedule integrity back is going to take some time. Before the pandemic, we had a huge shortage in aircraft. Manufacturers couldn't put them into service fast enough. Now with so many planes parked, getting them maintenance to go back into the air after sitting on the ground for 1.5 years, there's a huge backlog. There's only so many hangars and so many trained mechanics. And so the big challenges are getting planes into the air, getting pilots to fly them, and then ensuring that the schedules work for everybody. And all of those are going to take 12 or 18 months for airlines to figure out starting now, essentially. So with that having been said, what airlines have done is shift what they're flying. And we've seen new airlines pop up that have different models to take advantage of pockets of demand that other airlines have been missing, places like Salem. And so I think that's where our potential for success really comes in. Pre-pandemic, about 91% of the passengers who live in the immediate Salem area were flying out of PDX, 7% using Eugene. We were generating 1.2 million annual passengers. That's just the immediate Salem area. That's about 1,600 passengers per day in each direction. So that's enough to support about 20 departures a day at Salem. That's just if we only retain people who live in Salem. I will note too, if you go back 3 years, only about 2% of our passengers were driving down to Eugene. That number's up to 7% because what we're seeing is people in Salem want to avoid the drive to PDX. And all of you certainly understand that. I certainly do as a person who makes the drive the opposite direction. I-5, I-205, they're absolute disasters most of the day, and they're incredibly unpredictable. So that's pushing people to drive south for the predictability of how long the drive is going to take. If you look at peer market, just in terms of population, where we fit. So this is our metro area population. This isn't a huge, 3-hour circle around Salem or anything. This is Salem metro areas defined by the US Census Bureau. We're about 400,000 people. So Spokane is slightly larger. Eugene, of course, is smaller. Pasco Tri-City is considerably smaller, 100,000 fewer people. So Salem is larger than many, many other communities that have air service. And in some cases, almost double the size or even more than double the size of the communities that have air service. Salem is a relatively wealthy community, despite whatever you hear about the amount of income that's in Salem. The household income average is $52,000 in Salem. That's 10,000 more than Eugene and Medford. So Salem is much wealthier than Eugene and Medford, despite what you hear anecdotally. And again, this data is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It's federal government data. So if we look at these peer markets and the air service that they have, Eugene has 7 airlines now with household income that's $10,000 less than Salem and a population that has 25,000 fewer residents. 7 airlines, including Southwest. Spokane, 7 airlines. Pasco Tri-Cities has 5 airlines. Redmond, 6 airlines, Bend and Redmond, and Medford, 6 airlines. We are a larger community than the vast majority of these on this map. All of these airports have at least 5 airlines, and yet here we are without any air service. So that just gives you an idea of what's possible if our local population uses the local airport. You look at nonstop routes, Spokane has 21 nonstop routes. Eugene now has 15 nonstop cities that you can fly to, and Medford has 12. And you look at the number of passengers per capita. So this is just the number of passengers divided by the population. Eugene generates 3.1 airline passengers per capita. Pasco 2.9, Bend and Redmond 5.7. Part of that is because it's difficult in the winter to drive from Redmond up to Portland to get on other service, and so they retain more of their passengers. If you benchmark where we ought to be based on the average in the Northwest, we would be anywhere from 1.2 to 2.7 million passengers that we could generate just from the Salem metro area every single year. So that is a huge number. We're talking, if we were at 2.7 million annual passengers, we could support at least 5 airlines and somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 departures a day. So that's kind of where we should be punching. That's our weight class. And I think we underestimate what the Salem community could do. And I think that's been dangerous for us because we say, well, Portland's our airport. Well, we're not big enough for air service. None of that is true, especially with the way the community is growing now. So what we have to do is kind of work in our knowledge base of this market that we can actually support service and match it with the already established strategy of airlines. So we have the network carriers, 2 types of airlines in the country. Network carriers, these try to feed a hub. So they have thousands of city pairs that they serve. By United flies you from Portland to Denver and then off to the East Coast. They want to fill flights out of Denver, and that's their strategy. And Southwest is like this now too. I recruited Southwest to Bellingham. That service starts on November 7th. They're flying Oakland. That is designed to take people from Vancouver and Bellingham to Oakland and then beyond to all of the cities they fly to LA, to Long Beach, to Mexico. It's not designed to take people just to Oakland. So this is one type of service or strategy that exists in air service. The second is our low-cost carriers. These are designed to stimulate new traffic and to pull traffic back from big hubs. And there are a couple of new ones that have just launched that are very, very well funded. And they're doing really, really well. Breeze and Avelo are brand new. Both are making money already. Both have really nice service on brand new airplanes, flying nonstop destinations. And Avelo serves Medford and Eugene and Bend Redmond to Burbank, and they do absolutely great. Breeze is mostly in the east right now. But the beauty of these carriers is ultra low fares, simplicity of network, and larger airplanes that allow them to price well below what's available at the big hubs. And so with the conversations that we've been having, the carriers in the low-cost category have been much more receptive to the idea of Salem, and even Salem being an alternative to PDX, than the network carriers, who frankly are having a more difficult time getting pilots to fly their regional fleets. And just yesterday, United said that they may entirely eliminate 50-seat regional jets from their fleet in the next 5 years, and they don't know what role smaller communities will play in their network. So smaller communities are going to be more reliant on the low cost than the network as we move forward, at least over the next couple of years. So having said that, our main air service options in the West heavily lean towards those low-cost carriers. It doesn't mean that we don't still talk to the network carriers. It doesn't mean that we don't make our case, because we have been. We've been tremendously aggressive over the last 6 months in meeting in person with airlines. We've traveled all over the country, and we're going to continue to this fall. We've had altogether more than 20 in-person meetings with airline network planners for Salem, with our Fly Salem group flying with us, including Travel Salem. But what it's distilled is that our main options for service are the ones that you see there. So one of the important things that we want to make sure that we're doing here, knowing the sensibilities in Oregon and our commitment to the environment in Oregon, is make sure that we're not having a negative environmental impact. And so we did a lot of research to understand what the impact would be of taking cars off the road, so that we don't have people driving to PDX and putting those people on flights out of Salem. Are there efficiencies there, or are we just adding to the CO2 burden? So what we did is we looked at the CO2 emissions. This is just an example. We could do this for any route, and it would come out very similarly. We looked at Salem to Portland using the most popular car in the country, which is the Toyota Camry. The Division of Highway Transportation Safety Administration, which is another federal agency, says the average car trip has 1.56 passengers. So that's the number we used to calculate our CO2 impact. And then we added that to the impact per seat on the average plane that's used on Portland, San Francisco right now, which is 737-800 with 160 seats. And we looked at how many kilograms of CO2 per passenger with an average load factor. Load factor is a percentage of seats filled. We looked at combining those numbers of CO2 and then coming up with the total amount of CO2 that's emitted for that trip today. And so we come up with 122 kilograms of CO2 emitted per person for the trip to San Francisco today. If we look at a nonstop flight based on an Airbus 220, which would probably be an aircraft that we would see service with, we drop that to 68 kilograms a person. So we save 45% in CO2 emissions by getting a passenger off of I-5 and putting them directly out of Salem. And so our net CO2 per flight, when you think about that number, 45% fewer emissions, and you add that up over the course of the year, we're talking about huge amounts of carbon dioxide that is not emitted. So this local air service is actually exceptionally good for the Oregon environment, and exceptionally good at pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, reducing impact of climate change. People are going to travel either way. What we want them to do is to travel the most efficient way to reduce the environmental impact. So I think that's really important to point out. We're not adding environmental impact, we're mitigating environmental impact by recruiting local air service. So I want to close with kind of who we're competing against. Because you're going to be really surprised. We're not competing against Eugene. We're not competing against Medford or Pasco. We're competing against airports on the other side of the country. We're competing against Wilmington, North Carolina, because that airplane that you see on the screen can go anywhere in this country. And that airline is going to put it where it has the least risk and it can make the most revenue for every hour it's in the air. And so air service is very expensive. Talk about Seattle service. A daily flight to Seattle costs an airline almost $4 million a year. To San Francisco, just one daily flight would cost over $8 million a year. And if you look at Denver, a single daily flight, $10 million a year. So an airline coming in to a new airport, it's tremendous risk, but it's also a huge economic development investment. Think about a new employer coming into Salem and investing $10 million a year in Salem, and the incentives that the community would roll out for that kind of investment. That's what we're talking about here. It's a huge economic investment in connectivity and allowing our businesses to operate more efficiently and to grow. So 7-figure guarantees are required just to be in the game. $1 million incentives are very common. How common? There's a map of every airport that offers at least $1 million in incentives in the United States. That's every airport that's offering at least $1 million in incentives. It's basically every airport that has air service and a number of them that don't have air service. So that's who we're competing with. Every time an airline adds a route, well, I hear from our coalition at Fly Salem, how come it wasn't us? Well, just look at this map. An airline is evaluating Salem against every single dot. We have to be better than every single other dot on this map. And that's really difficult to do. And that underscores why the community all has to be pulling in the same direction. You look at San Luis Obispo, which is one of my markets proudly. We have a $2 million rolling revenue guarantee provided by the county. And we have $1 million plus in spending from Visit SlowCal in marketing every single year. And just in the last 4 years, we've recruited every route that you see on that map. That's not everywhere we have service to in San Luis Obispo. We have service to many more communities. That is the new service that we've been able to recruit with $3 million in rolling incentives that are available. But it takes that kind of community commitment to make these services happen. All Fly Salem can do and all I can do for Salem is try and move us up the list. We use the best data. We use every bit of ticket data, every bit of intelligence on how the market is performing right now. Everywhere our people are traveling, we know every single trip that's taken out of our market. And we use that to move up the list. But when we're even with another market, the airline's going to go with the least risk. And the least risk is a market like San Luis Obispo, where they're made whole if they lose money as they're starting service. And that's what we've got to work toward. Another example, Idaho Falls, we did $1 million revenue guarantee for Denver. That service flies 5 times a day now. We did $1 million for Seattle that just started in June. Our average load factor percentage of seats filled on that is at 83%. We haven't used any of the guarantee. Bellingham, altogether to get Southwest, we had over 1.5 million in total incentives to get Southwest. That service again starts this coming November. That we started recruiting that service 11 years ago, by the way. That's how long it took us to get Southwest, 11 years to get that put together. And so we look for fee waivers. We have that from the city, 0 cost of operation for the first 2 years so that there's no immediate cost to a carrier to come in, and then very low cost thereafter. The marketing support and Travel Salem is huge here, and direct cash so that we can ensure the planes are full. But that minimum revenue guarantee that Fly Salem has been putting together now for several years is really the key, where we agree to a base revenue number. If we're below that, we make up the difference. If we're above it, we don't have to pay anything. That's the best way to get to the top of the list. So having said that, I will wrap up my comments.
There was a question that came in for you, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
The question is, I understand the comparison of population size among metros, but of the metros you have shared in the Pacific Northwest, we seem to be the closest from an international airport. Given the population of the Willamette Valley as a whole, can you share a comparison of another metro that has multiple airports?
Well, the best comparison there is Paine-Field and Seattle. Paine-Field has nonstops to 9 cities, has 24 departures a day, and is less than 30 miles to SeaTac. And so those absolutely exist. And it's a great point that isolation is the best friend of air service. That's the reason Bozeman, Montana has service to New York and Boston nonstop. It's because it's so far from everywhere. Salem's not that. But with 1.2 million passengers a year, say we retain only 20%. Let's say 80% of our people continue to drive to PDX. 80%. We still can support 5 departures a day. So the isolation is not near as important in a place like Salem that has a very large local population.
And is it good to get the first initial airline in, even if it's a low-cost airline, and then the other flights will follow if they see success?
Yeah, generally, I mean, we want air service. We don't have the ability to be super picky over which partner we work with. We are casting a relatively wide net because we're unproven. We represent tremendous risk to a carrier. We know the arguments are good. There are other places a carrier can put that aircraft that are much less risky. And so we would just be happy to have one carrier, I would say at this point. We'll worry about trying to layer on carriers and expand the terminal, et cetera, once we have successful service in the market.
All right. Any other questions for Jack? I was thinking I have to be careful if I ever see you in an airport.
I get that joke quite a bit.
Yeah. You get that, Brent? Hi, Jack. You be careful. Okay. Well, we certainly thank you for all your work. I mean, you've put together a very compelling case for why we should have regional air service. And it's one of those things that is a great source of what I like to call clean dollars. Tourism dollars are just wonderful things. We've got this fantastic wine industry here that we need to get people here for. And so we definitely have a reason to bring them. And we just need the airlines to get them here. So with that, is Ed Mortimer here? I don't see Ed here. Is he here? I see Zachary nodding his head yes.
Hey, TJ.
Oh, there you go. Hi, Ed. So I'm going to introduce Ed. Ed is the Vice President of Transportation and Infrastructure at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Ed oversees the development and implementation of the Chamber's transportation infrastructure policy and represents the Chamber on Capitol Hill, as well as before the administration and industry organizations. Prior to that, Ed was the Director of Transportation and Infrastructure at the U.S. Chamber. Earlier in his career, he was Director of Government Relations for the Transportation Intermediaries Association and a legislative representative for the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. Ed has his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from American University and completed an extensive management program at Georgetown University. He lives in Alexandria, Virginia with his wife and 2 children. Ed, thanks for being here. You're going to talk about the transportation bill and how it relates to Salem and our airport.
Absolutely. And TJ, thank you for having me. Zach, thanks for having me. I was hopeful when I was going to talk to you all today, I was going to tell you that the bill's done. Unfortunately, like a lot of things in Washington, the simplest things can be the most complex and challenging. So I wanted to kind of go back and talk about how we got here, the benefits of this infrastructure bill to Salem, and I think some opportunities that you all have as a community to be ready to make sure that these dollars are used for projects of most interest to the community. I was listening to Jack's presentation, and I think a lot of the work that the airport is doing can be buttressed with some of this federal investment and help you guys even make yourselves more attractive to get the airline service you're desperately working for. So again, your chamber, your members have been a great advocate over the years of understanding the importance of infrastructure. Your community obviously has the river, you have the airport, You have I-5. You all understood for some time the importance of that to attracting businesses to your community, to improving the quality of life of your citizens, and have been a great partner with the U.S. Chamber in getting some federal focus on a large infrastructure bill that is multimodal and really covers the physical infrastructure. So not just our roads and bridges, our airports, but also our ports and waterways, but also things like clean water, both wastewater, stormwater, rural broadband for certain parts of your communities that maybe they don't have the customer base for private sector broadband access, but how the public-private partnerships can get it there. Energy, making sure that we have a variety of energy sources so that we can be energy independent. And so that's what we've been advocating for the last several years. We've been making progress, but of course, nothing in Washington happens fast. We were significant progress in the last administration, but we didn't quite get there. This administration has made infrastructure a top priority. And again, our focus on infrastructure is the physical stuff. I'll talk a minute about some of the other things that folks are calling infrastructure, but our focus is really the physical things that businesses need modern infrastructure to be successful. As you are looking to attract, the high-skilled millennial worker that every community around the country is looking for, infrastructure is something that people decide. There's three things that they really look at when they're deciding where to live, where to locate their businesses. They're looking for the tax policy of the community, they're looking at the regulatory environment, and then the infrastructure. If they don't have adequate infrastructure, they're going to go somewhere else that does. And so, making sure that in a global economy that we have a national network, so folks in Salem know that they can send their goods and products anywhere in this country, and it can be done safely, efficiently, will allow us to continue to have that long-term economic growth that is kind of a cornerstone of what we are at the U.S. Chamber, is promoting policies that provide that long-term economic growth and improve quality of life for everyone. And so this administration obviously made infrastructure a big deal. But one of the things we saw, that the traditional way of doing bills in Washington don't work anymore, going through committees, having each body vote. That process, unfortunately, is not working. And so the infrastructure bill that we're going to be talking about today came together in a very different process. It came together by a group of 20 senators, 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats, who said, we're not on the committee of jurisdiction. We're not going to wait for the hearings. We're going to just put our heads together and come up with some bipartisan solutions to address infrastructure in a big way. And so these members of Congress came together in the Senate, and they put together this bill, which is a $550 billion in new investment in all this infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, over 5 years. When you add in existing investments the federal government was making, this is over $1 trillion in 10 years. Again, you all know that infrastructure investments are long-term. The word we're using for this legislation is shovel-worthy, not shovel-ready. You might remember in 2009, the Obama administration had an infrastructure bill that basically said we got to get the money out in 90 days. That really just did not allow for some long-term strategic investments to transform our infrastructure. This bill has the opportunity to do that. So again, the Senate came together and the bill passed in August in a 69-30 vote. So every Democrat, both of your senators, joined with 19 Republicans, including the Republican leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, to support this investment to modernize our infrastructure. If you're following Washington today, there are not 69 senators that can agree on the day of the week. So getting that large bipartisan vote was a real credit to everyone coming together. We had business, we had labor, we had folks that traditionally don't get involved in infrastructure, but said, look, this is something that should be able to bring both parties together, that can actually address a critical need that our country has. And so getting 40% of Senate Republicans to vote yes is a big deal. Does not happen often. But again, a credit to a lot of folks who really came together to articulate the needs, just like your community has done a great job of articulating the needs of your community, the needs for investment, and the long-term needs of these investments. These are assets that when these investments are made, these are assets that your community will benefit from for 50 to 100 years to come. So unlike a lot of other spending in Washington, where you can question how long it lasts and where it goes, infrastructure are investments that last. And so that's why we've weighed in so heavily on this bill. And so while we had a fairly easy push in the Senate, getting this bill through the House has been a little challenging. You might recall that as part of this legislation, we also have a 5-year reauthorization of our federal highway and transit programs. We were hoping to get this package voted by September 30th, which is when our federal highway and transit programs expired. Unfortunately, the House was unable to get that vote on the floor. So we had a temporary shutdown of all of our federal highway and transit programs. Over the weekend, the Congress approved a 30-day extension. We were already operating on a 1-year extension of these programs. So unfortunately, like too many issues in Washington, we just kicked the can down the road. The new deadline is October 31st. So we are advocating with the House to bring this bill up and let's get it done. We don't need another extension. Let's get the investments done. Let's start making the projects become reality. Just to give you some examples of what this means to Oregon and the opportunity that Salem has. So just on the federal highway program, the state of Oregon would get $3.4 billion in new investment over 5 years. That's about a 44% increase in the amount of federal funding you're getting today. Just imagine what state and community could do with that type of investment. We also believe that if this bill gets enacted into law, that the Oregon will come up with additional revenue, and there's some private revenue for certain projects that we think could join some of these investments. Because as you all know that work on transportation projects, usually you cobble together funding sources from a variety of different areas. But if we make a major federal investment, we think state, local, and private money will join in. So this is that opportunity available. I know water is a big deal in your community. This bill would bring Oregon $537 million to clean up stormwater, wastewater programs. The airports that Jack talked about, this bill would bring Oregon $211 million in new airport investment over 5 years. Just think you can finish up a lot of what you need to do to make your airport more attractive with the types of investment that are available in this legislation. Public transit in the state will grow by almost $500 million over the 5-year period. So again, substantial investments that could truly be game changers for your community. Unfortunately, we've seen our infrastructure bill tied up into partisan politics. Both parties are responsible for this stalemate that we're in right now. And so, you know, your congressman, Congressman Schrader, has been a real advocate for getting this bipartisan bill over the goal line. Unfortunately, we have the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership holding this bill hostage as the Congress also works on what we call the human infrastructure, which is things that are important, like childcare, affordable housing. But our view at the U.S. Chamber is that that's a separate issue. We want an up or down vote on the infrastructure bill, and then Congress will dispose of the reconciliation bill. I'm sure, as many of you all are aware, the U.S. Chamber is opposed to the reconciliation bill, not because of the things necessarily in it, although there are some bad provisions in this bill. The reason we're opposed to it is because the tax increases that this bill calls for would devastate the business community at a time we're looking to get out of a pandemic. Again, we're trying to build long-term economic growth. And in our view, the proposals to deal with childcare, affordable housing, if they're that important to get done, let's figure out bipartisan solutions like we did on the infrastructure bill. We don't need to do it through a partisan basis. But again, the President of the United States, the Speaker of the House last Friday, said that these two bills are going to be linked, and that until further progress is made on the reconciliation or human infrastructure bill, that this physical infrastructure bill that we desperately need is on hold. So what we would encourage you is, Congressman Schrader's there, but the other folks in the Oregon delegation urge their leadership to bring this bill up for a vote. Oregon has the chairman of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, Peter DeFazio, who, even though he had a different bill, he went on the House floor 2 weeks ago and has endorsed this bill and has urged his colleagues to support passage of it. That was difficult for him because obviously this bill is mainly a Senate product. But I think the chairman understands the importance of getting this bipartisan bill done and the need to get it done now. The longer we delay, the more difficult it's going to be to get this finally completed. And the projects that you all could be talking about are going to be on hold until this bill gets sent to the president's desk. So all we have to do is get the House to vote this thing through. There doesn't have to go back to the Senate. This bill isn't going to be changed, so we know what the bill is. It goes to the president's desk, he signs it into law, and we start taking concepts and put them into real projects. So the opportunity is very great. We appreciate everything you guys have done. It's a critical moment in our country's history, in our view, because if we miss this opportunity to get infrastructure done, it's going to be very difficult, I think, to get anything of substance done at the federal level for the rest of this Congress. And so we're all in on trying to get this bill done. Unfortunately, we're not making a whole lot of friends on the extremes of either party, but it's the right policy for the business community. And again, we're going to push to get this thing done. So I'm looking forward to taking any questions that you have. I can get into more details on any specifics of the legislation. But TJ, I'll turn it over to you and we can take some questions.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, as soon as we saw the popularity of the infrastructure bill on both sides, I knew people were going to start attaching things to it to try and get it through, which just makes it less popular. What do you put the odds at right now for this infrastructure bill getting through?
So I think at the end of the day, this bill is going to happen. Let me tell you why. Because the president of the United States, this is a top agenda item for him. It's a top agenda item of the leaders of the House and Senate, including the Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell. I think we've gone too far. I think we're just seeing some political gamesmanship. And I believe at the end of the day, these folks are going to do the right thing. Unfortunately, there's an old saying in Washington, they end up doing the right thing after they try every other way.
Right. So one of the questions that's come in is which governing body, federal or state, chooses the projects which ultimately receive funding?
Great question. Traditionally, these bills are done through formulas that go to the states, and then the states will decide. About 80% of the funding in this bill goes to the states. There's a couple other areas, though, I think, because we hear a lot from states that some communities feel like their state house doesn't necessarily give them a fair shake. This bill, for the first time, has a pot of money. I'm not going to say it's huge, but it's about $12 billion that can allow local communities to make some local decisions. So it takes some of that authority away from state houses and gives it back to local communities. There's also a pretty significant, what we call a discretionary grant program, that every year communities can apply for federal funding. It's a competitive grant program. And so you can apply with other communities around the country. And there's a criteria that the Department of Transportation lays out. And then you can win funding for projects that way. Most of those projects that apply show that they have some state, local funding. They're looking for federal gap funding to finish the job. So if you have a plan, you've shown that you've cobbled together some funding sources. Those are the types of projects that I think are going to be best opportunity to win awards. So again, it is through the states mostly, but there are other opportunities, and you cobble this all together. From a local community perspective, this is probably the most flexibility we've seen out of the federal government to get opportunities to get some of your local needs funded.
Awesome. Thanks for that. We appreciate your efforts. Any other questions for Ed? You can either type it in the chat or ask it directly.
Yeah, I've got one quick question too. For our members, how can, I think you kind of hit on this in your answer you just gave, but how can individuals, businesses, community members advocate for specific projects within their region?
Mhm. So good question. There's a couple of ways. First of all, I would talk to your congressional delegation, both senators and your congressmen, let them know. I know that many of them, and I know your community has also let them know as this process, this process has taken over a year. So I'm sure you've already articulated some of the needs of your community. But I would continue that even after this bill's done, because implementing this bill, there's opportunities to make sure that these even though this bill sounds big, unfortunately, our needs are a lot bigger than $1 trillion. So we want to make sure that the limited dollars go to the projects with the greatest return to the business community. So there's opportunities to work with the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, other agencies. And so we can help you guide that path, depending on the project you're looking at, Army Corps of Engineers for water projects. So I think there are various ways to do that. You can do many of them locally, but if there's any federal help we can provide, we're glad to do that.
I know that we had people from Senator Wyden's office that wanted to sign into this meeting. Is there anybody from Senator Wyden's office on this call?
I don't believe that Fritz was able to join, but he requested to have the recording sent to him after.
Okay, awesome. Well, that would be Senator or Representative DeFazio holds a lot of sway. He's of all of our delegates, he's probably one of the more powerful folks that can impact this bill. So reaching out to Congressman DeFazio and then Senator Wyden would be good next steps for the people in this call. Obviously, it's on their radar. And like I said, these are excellent dollars that will impact your business in some way. This is good investment money that will have a payoff coming back to the business community here. And so if there's no questions for Ed, I don't see any in the chat. We'll turn to Angie Onyewuchi. Angie is the CEO of Travel Salem, and I will say that she is now Salem's champion. I wondered who was going to take up that mantle after Janet Taylor was no longer mayor, and it's Angie. If you ever want to know like what's the best thing about Salem, Angie's the person to call because she'll give it to you alphabetical and numerical. And before she was at Travel Salem, she was the executive director for the Pinnacle Theater. And under her watch, they completed a $1 million capital campaign to renovate the theater. And prior to that, she was the director of marketing and public relations for the Portland Opera and Broadway Across America series. And she generated 10 million in ticket sales annually. She has her bachelor in journalism from the University of Oregon and lives in Salem with her 2 daughters. She loves hiking in the rain at Opal Creek and writing children's books, playing soccer, stargazing, and working on international entertainment project with a humanitarian heart. And so she's all I can say is that she is an excellent asset to the city of Salem. She helps drive a lot of people into the Willamette Valley, very creative, and her knack for branding is benefiting all of us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Angie.
Oh my goodness, I wasn't prepared for all of that this morning. I don't know if I can live up to all of that, TJ. My goodness. Well, good morning, everybody. What a pleasure to be here with all of you. And what a great topic we're talking about today. And I actually can't think of anything more important to jumpstart our economy here. That we couldn't do anything more valuable than bring commercial air service here. That would be like basically dropping a Fortune 500 company into the middle of our community. The impacts to all corners of our economy and our community would be incredible. So that's why it's a priority for the Chamber of Commerce. That's why it's a priority for SEDCOR, and that's why it's a priority for Travel Salem. I don't have a whole lot I want to share with you this morning, but just a few points. Primarily, the initiative has really been about focusing on outbound, right? So providing another asset and benefit for our community to be able to fly and connect to all corners of our world through our local airport. But I'm more interested in the inbound travel. I'm interested in promoting this destination and having people come here and leave their valuable discretionary dollars right here in our community. So I'm interested in those other locations that we would be flying into and target marketing those consumers to come here and enjoy our wine country and the beautiful bounty that we have here. In the past and currently, we are primarily a drive market. Yes, we do have rail service into our community, but let's face it, we are a drive market. Yet we are in the heart of Oregon's wine country. So what typically happens is that consumers or visitors fly into Portland, they stay in Portland, and they drive down and experience our wine country and our recreation down here. So we want to flip that, right? We want to have them fly direct into the source of what is absolutely Oregon. So that's a real critical mission of what we're trying to accomplish here. We have a lot of corporate clients that fly into Salem that do business here, and they need to fly out Friday morning. And what do? They actually have to drive up to Portland Thursday night, stay in a hotel on Thursday night so they can catch their flight Friday morning from Portland. We would like to recapture that business as well. We'd like our corporate clients to be able to stay in this market Thursday night, which drives a ton of economic impact into our community. Just one additional night supports like $60,000 worth of economic impact directly. So because of how tourism is integrated throughout our economy. So we want to recapture that. It would also allow us to capture new business that we currently can't really compete with. A lot of our trade shows and conventions, large group business that want to come and hold their events here, don't come because we're too far from an airport. My colleague Debbie McCune just recently got back from a convention, and 13 of the 40 people that she was talking to, they were asking, do you have commercial air service? And she said, no, but we're working on it. We're very, very close. They said, as soon as you get that, we'll be there. So that's a really huge trigger for us as well. You know, and then let's talk about the events we already have secured. So for instance, we've got Ironman, right? We just had that amazing event in July. It brought in about a little over $10 million economic impact right into our community, to our local businesses here. And those delegates came from California. About 30% of the folks that came to that event flew in from California. So they had to fly into Portland and drive down. We want them to fly direct into Salem, and that would also be a game changer for us. So, you know, the value to the industry is very clear. What this type of securing this type of service here in Salem would do for our tourism sector, as well as the entire business community. But I heard, you know, Jack talk a little bit about the competitive nature of recruiting commercial air service. And I've had the great fortune of attending a couple of conferences with both Jack and Brent DeHart, and meeting with the carriers and sitting down and talking to them about their priorities and the complex decisions that they're having to make about where they're going to plug in service, and how they feel about Salem. And they're very excited, very interested in Salem. And we're actually kind of at the point now where they know our names. They know who Salem is. And that's a huge stride, because when we started this, they didn't know. We weren't on their radar. And so we've made huge progress there, but it is incredibly competitive. I mean, we're sitting in a room with about anywhere from 60 to 100 other markets from across the country, all working these airline representatives to get them to convince them to come to our market. So it's very competitive, and we're doing our very best here to increase our incentive package. So our MRG, you know, $700,000 in pledges that we've secured so far. We need to be at $1 million. And, you know, hopefully as we get closer to an announcement, we're going to need to turn those pledges into cash. So we can do this. I know our community can 100% do this. But we are competing with, for instance, San Luis Obispo. Jack mentioned SlowCal. I personally love SlowCal. I go down there a lot now because my daughter goes to Cal Poly there, but man, they are competitive. They're half of our size. And they had, before COVID, Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, before COVID, they had 22 flights a day. Now they're around 11 flights a day. Wouldn't we be just jacked up, so to speak, sorry, Jack, to have 11 flights a day. But they are competitive and they really, really go after the carriers. The $2 million in MRG that they have rolling that they'll offer to a carrier to come into their market, the $1 million they have, $1 million plus they have that my colleague down there, Chuck, puts towards marketing. So, you know, it's competitive. Just because they build it doesn't mean they'll come. That's the saying we're all familiar with, what, build it and they'll come. That's not true. We have this amazing workhorse airport sitting there with incredible potential. But we need to market it. We need to get, you know, things rolling there. So even if we land the first carrier, and I have a feeling we're hopefully close to doing that soon, you know, we're still going to need to be in the marketing game. We're still going to need to go out and compete and secure a new service, bring in other carriers, expand the service that we do have. So it's going to be a consistent thing that we need to participate in to continue to grow our market. Lastly, I'll just say, you know, we've talked about, and I'm sorry, Jack, I might have missed you mentioning this in your presentation. I had trouble connecting earlier. We're remote right now, so my internet's not the greatest. But I don't know if you talked about the whole concept of Portland South. Did you mention that?
Just briefly, I mentioned that the low-cost carriers see us as an alternative to PDX, and I think that's where ultimate growth will come. Not to step on you, Angie, just to clarify, I think as Salem and Portland kind of merge together and the growth out of Portland comes south past Wilsonville, past Woodburn, that Salem is going to be a second airport for Portland over time.
Yep, I completely agree. And, you know, that's not to say that we are be a part of Portland. You know, I know there's a lot of pride in our community about Salem and standing on our own 2 feet and claiming what is ours. And, you know, that's all well and good. And we have our own brand. We have our own vibe. We have our own value proposition, very different than any other place in Oregon. And we stand very strong on that. But another position of strength is to stand as Portland South, so to speak, and to offer a different type of travel experience for consumers, quicker and easier to get to us, way easier to fly out of Salem, a better experience all around. And that will appeal to the travelers of the day who are looking for less clutter in their lives, less stress. And so we're really, I think we're positioned, we couldn't be positioned any better, frankly, than to win this game. And we're going to. So I want to thank every single person on this call who has stepped up to make a pledge to the MRG. We're so grateful. And, you know, if you are interested in making a pledge to the MRG, please call me. You can reach me on my cell number, 971-901-2325 anytime. I'm available to you. And I know Jack, Brent, and myself would be happy to answer any additional questions you would ever have. But TJ and Tom, I want to thank you for the opportunity today. And I'm really excited about the future for commercial air service and Fly Salem.
Yes, thanks. Angie and Brent have done a lot of work. So Brent, thank you. If you go through the chat, there's some good questions from Ian Davidson and good answers from Brent in there. So Brent and Angie have done a great job going to represent our community before these airlines and making the case to them. And I I do think we are close or getting closer to getting an airline here. And so we do need some, if you've been holding off, every business is going to be impacted. I know sometimes it's hard to think of how your business is going to be impacted by additional flights coming into Salem. But I know that, you know, the wine industry and our travel industry is going to be impacted. And these dollars are going to flow because they're going to need additional insurance. They're going to need to build out their resources. They're going to need to help hire folks. And all of those things touch our industries. And so I'm excited about what this is going to mean for our community. And we've made a lot of investments in our airport. And our airport is ready and can handle these additional flights. And speaking of our airport, we have our airport administrator, John Pascal, on. John has been managing commercial service airports for nearly 25 years. And for the past 10 years, he's worked as our airport manager here in Salem. Prior to Salem, he was at Midway in the Pacific Ocean. And before that, he was at Bullhead International Airport in Arizona. He has his undergraduate degree in finance with an MBA in strategy and management. In his second job, he runs a small farm in Polk County with his wife and teenage son, Owen. Awesome. Thanks, John, for being here. What do you grow on your farm?
Primarily cattle, but my farm borders my in-laws farm, and they actually raise thoroughbred racehorses. So
Nice.
I've got racehorses on my property too that graze for a fee, of course. There's no free grass.
Yeah, it's good work for Owen.
Yeah, he's learned a little bit of farm work, but he's also learned there's a bigger world out there, and that farming isn't where it's at. So
Yeah,
he's a junior in high school now, and he thinks he wants to be an officer in the Air Force. So he wants to go to ROTC, probably at Oregon State. So we'll see how that plays out. But thank you for the introduction, TJ and Zach, for the invite, and Tom. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about something near and dear to my heart, which is your local airport. I did put together a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to attempt to screen share here. Presentations and technology are not my best friends, but we'll do what I can here. You'll bear with me one moment. I think I have the ability to screen share. Is that right?
You do, John.
All right. Let's see if I can. Okay. You see my screen with the Salem Municipal Airport on it?
got it.
Fantastic. All right. There's a lot of information here. Some of this is just airport only. I find that a lot of folks don't know a lot about their local airport. So I like to just give some brief, broad information, and then I like to do a Q&A because I'm always interested in what people want to know about it, whether it's related to air service or not. So I'm just going to wing through some slides here, and I'll leave some time for some Q&A at the end. First of all, the airport today, if you're not familiar with it, the Salem Municipal Airport is a 751-acre facility, home to more than 130 aircraft hangars and several businesses, which employ over 600 people. And the facility supports nearly 40,000 annual aircraft landings and departures. Day-to-day operations include maintenance of 100 acres of pavement, 650 acres of grounds, an extensive airfield lighting system, and most importantly for this conversation, keeping the facility compliant with FAA standards for commercial service airports. The airfield and the airport facilities are currently capable of handling commercial air service. The airport is certified as such by the FAA, and other than the installation of TSA security equipment, is for the most part ready to operate for commercial service in a very short period of time. I would also note that the Salem Municipal Airport is operated as an enterprise fund within the city of Salem. As such, it collects its own revenues primarily from long-term land leases for hangars and businesses, and it also pays its own expenses. There is no city general fund money appropriated to airport operations, and all airport revenue must be spent on airport-related operations, maintenance, and capital improvement projects, which is to say the city can't siphon off any airport revenue and use it for other purposes. From a 2014 Oregon Department of Aviation economic study, even without commercial air service, the airport is a tremendous economic engine to the local community. And I think a lot of people aren't really aware of the benefit of the airport if they can't fly into and out of it. I get this question a lot. I mean, really, why do we have an airport and why do we continue to put money into it? But this airport provides a number of critical services to the surrounding communities and the region. Forestry operations, disaster relief, search and rescue, law enforcement, aeromedical services, cargo, aerial surveying, and many other commercial, industrial, and economic activity functions. The airport supports over 1,200 jobs in the community, including 17 on-airport businesses employing over 600 people. Another 659 jobs indirectly, accounting for over $54 million in payroll and $221 million in business sales. So significant levels of commerce pass through this airport, even without commercial service. Both locally based aircraft owners and visiting aircraft spend money in the local community, purchasing fuel, food, hotel rooms, rental cars, and other goods and services here locally. Commercial air service would, of course, add to these figures in an as yet to be determined way based on future need for airline and TSA staffing, as well as probably additional airport staff to manage increased custodial maintenance and security duties. And given that these numbers are now 7 years old, I think we're actually closer to probably 700 jobs on the airport. You'll notice, as kind of a side note, the average per job on the airport is about $52,000 per year, which is significantly higher than Salem's per capita income, which I think is probably still in the mid-20s or maybe close to 30,000. But Jack mentioned in his presentation that the Salem's got some, got some money in it, and aviation jobs tend to be very well-paying jobs, and so some of the jobs that we would gain having commercial air service are probably considered living wage jobs, depending on how you define that. Direct benefits to the airport from commercial service. These benefits are specifically tied to the airport. So when we talk about the city benefit, it's the city's airport, but of course I mentioned earlier, airport revenue has to be spent on the airport. So I put together some estimates here just based on several assumptions. I assumed an Airbus A220 aircraft flying twice per week. Made some assumptions on fuel uplifts, amount of space that they would lease in the terminal, public parking revenue based on what we see with the Groom PDX shuttle. And everything except landing fees is really just sort of a swag at this point, but I needed somewhere just to start and kind of give a sense for how much revenue can be generated by 2 flights a week at the Salem airport. Could be more, could be less, but obviously as airline service grows, the landing fees, fuel flowage fees, and parking revenue all increase as well. Potentially space rent, also as either the one airline we have continues to grow or if other airlines enter the market to compete. So you can see it roughly using these figures, it's about $96,000 per year in annual revenue to the airport, which is not a small amount of money for an airport this size. Other advantages for commercial air service are capital improvements. Since 2014, the FAA has invested over $12 million at the Salem airport. I won't step through each project just in the interest of time, but all of these are in some way tied to commercial airline service. In particular, last year's project which was, the terminal apron rehabilitation. So it's the parking ramp outside the terminal here. I would also note that these projects were all supported by the FAA in part because Salem is a certificated air carrier airport. And while we don't have commercial service today, we are still a fully certificated airport. And we continue to maintain and improve our airport to support future airline service. So these are federal dollars that are spent on local contractors and on goods and services in the community. So it's again, not a small amount of money. Also in terms of capital improvements, another benefit to the airport is when a commercial service like ours exceeds 10,000 passenger enplanements in 1 year, the minimum annual FAA grant entitlement dollars increase from our current level of $150,000 a year, which is considered a non-primary commercial service airport, to a minimum guarantee of $1 million per year, which puts us in a primary airport category. So that's about 7 times as much money to put towards airport capital improvement projects. The presence of airline service also helps the airport compete better for FAA discretionary funding for larger projects such as terminal expansions, parking facilities, and so on. So I made an assumption of 2 flights per week. If we only put 100 people on each one of those flights, it gets us to 10,400 enplanements a year. So it's really a pretty low bar to clear for significant increases in federal grant dollars. Now, the downside is that there's a 10% required local match for taking federal dollars. So right now I have to match $15,000. If I go to $1 million, I have to match $100,000 for every $1 million that I'm granted. So there goes the first year's annual revenue. It's probably just enough to break even on that. But as airline service increases and we generate more revenue, of course, then we're putting more money into the airport's fund. Federal grant assurances. So when the city takes federal grants, there's requirements for accepting this federal money. They're called grant assurances. There are 39 separate grant assurances that we're required to abide by. I wanted to point out grant assurance number 22 here. It says the grantee, which in this case is the city of Salem. It's not the airport, it's actually the city of Salem. But the city will make the airport available as an airport for public use on reasonable terms, and without unjust discrimination to all types, kinds, and classes of aeronautical activities, including commercial aeronautical activities offering services to the public at the airport. So this is really just to say that the city is not required to financially support an airline or offer discounts or fee waivers or any of that, although we hope that they will. But it must treat all users the same. So if it provides a fee waiver for one, it has to provide a fee waiver for all. If it chooses not to provide a fee waiver, then it can't pick and choose its favorites. And it cannot deny an airline the opportunity to offer commercial services at the airport without violating this grant assurance. And I think that's a key piece of information. I get asked this question every now and again. So those are some direct benefits really to the airport / city, although all that revenue has to stay on the airport. But you all know, and I'm really speaking to the choir here, that there are larger community benefits to having commercial air service. You've touched on some of them earlier. Jack touched on them. Angie touched on them. So I'll go through a few. I actually picked some quotes out of some recent publications that touch on this directly, including the Regional Airline Association and their Regional Horizons magazine back in 2019. Bill Swellbar, the chief industry strategist for Delta Airport Consultants and the lead researcher for the economic impact of small community airports, said that small community air service generates a significant amount of economic activity in the United States. And the numbers are pretty compelling. Air service is really an important driver of economic activity and jobs. That article goes on to say that there are 570 what are called small community airports in the United States. And while we don't consider ourselves a small community, we would fit into the small community category. And air service to those airports generates $134 billion of economic activity to those respective communities. The airports create 1 million jobs that generate $36 billion in wages and commensurate tax revenue to the states and communities that have air service. So that's really where the big benefit is to the larger community, including the city of Salem, but also to our region. And it goes on to say that really that $134 billion figure is really underestimated because it doesn't include impacts associated with economic development. If included, that impact would likely more than double. So you're talking $250 billion worth of economic activity to have air service in small communities. And then again, for those communities, and Salem would certainly fit into this category, flights to hub airports and one-stop service to cities around the world is critical. This type of connectivity enables businesses to be based either entirely or partly in these communities. And it enables travelers to more frequently visit friends and family and have access to premium services such as healthcare that may not be available in their community. So these are some key quality of life factors. So that was all from the Regional Airline Association magazine. I also plucked a couple of quotes from the federal government. The US GAO's report on small community air service says that communities of all sizes seek access to air service as a driver for attracting investment, generating employment, and providing mobility for citizens. And the FAA stated that commercial aviation is important to economic performance because it supports economic output, attracts business and tourism, supports local economic development, and helps retain jobs that might otherwise be relocated elsewhere. So that's a whole bunch of information to tell you what you already know, which we all feel like is obvious, that commercial air service benefits communities in many, many ways, including economic development, jobs, increased mobility, increased quality of life, amongst many other things.
Hey, John, a question came in, and the question is, would frequent commercial service impact the airport's existing commercial base? As an example, would Garmin be impacted because of the addition of commercial flights?
No.
Negatively impacted.
No. So really, commercial air service at Salem would essentially be a standalone operation. This terminal that we have, the parking ramp outside, obviously the runway and all the taxiways are here to serve commercial airlines, but there's no impact to anybody else that uses the airport. If you think of, even if we had 3 flights a day out of the 150 aircraft operations or so that we have on average every day, that's just another 3. So there'd be very, very little impact or no impact really to any other operations on the airport. That was the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time and opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Any other additional questions for John? John, how does our airport compare to Eugene's? in terms of size of runway or ability of planes to land here?
So our airport, all airports are sized differently. There's an old saying, when you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. Eugene's got a longer runway. They've got a much larger terminal, but you can look back in time, and I would probably guess that Eugene looked much like Salem back before when it started commercial air service. Probably had a very small terminal, moderate facilities, but that doesn't mean that we can't serve air carriers today. We would quickly outgrow this terminal and quickly outgrow our ramp if we had more than probably, if we had several flights per day, particularly if they're going to operate on top of one another. Our terminal is very small, but these are the demand constraints that we need to show the FAA to compete for funding for larger terminals, for larger ramps, for that type of infrastructure improvement. We can't build these things in advance and then hope that airlines will show up. So Eugene's larger than us, but there are airports out there. Jack can probably name you off the top of his head probably a dozen that are similar in size to Salem that have commercial air service and that have multiple flights per day. So we're there. We have everything we need short of the TSA. And then if we end up with those demand constraints, that will actually be a very, very good problem for us to have.
Yeah, Tim Hay just posted that Salem's airport runway is longer than John Wayne's airport in Orange County.
That is correct. Yeah, I think we have an extra 100 feet, and John Wayne Airport has quite a number of commercial flights every day. Great. Well, thanks. I'm here if there's any other questions. I'll stop sharing at this point.
Thank you. We appreciate this. This is a huge opportunity. I remember when I was on council, it was the last things we did was make some investments in this airport because Linda Norris, our city manager at the time, knew that this was a strategic investment to make for future generations. And I love the idea of people visiting the Willamette Valley and touching down and getting their bags taken to the Grand Hotel downtown and then out to Willamette Valley Vineyards within 15 minutes of landing. That's a great it's a great way to show off our area. And so I just think we have all kinds of opportunities here. So it's incumbent upon us. I mean, I am amazed when I look at the marketing that other areas are doing and how all the businesses are all in. And then our area, the reaction has been, I would say, lukewarm or tepid. I think as people try to figure out how this is going to benefit them, and it's hard to draw a line directly from increased flights directly to their business. But I do believe that this will benefit us. And like Angie said, this is the biggest economic opportunity we have for our community, and we can't lose it. And we're right on the precipice of, I think, getting service here. So once we do get service, I mean, it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to be using it, right? To flying out of Salem. And I love that idea of just landing down there. And Katie, I appreciate you helping our attendance numbers by bringing your son to the meeting. This is good stuff. If anybody else has got grandkids or kids with them, we're going to count them towards our attendees.
Fantastic. Thank you.
EJ, would you mind entertaining? I'd like Brent DeHart to talk a little bit about a conversation that is occurring on a couple of message boards that I've been watchful of, and that is the choice between investing in different types of transportation infrastructure. And there is a very vocal group that are saying, hey, hold on, let's not look at commercial air service until we have fully funded our own public transit system and the like. And they are very two unique pockets, and diversified transportation is important for any community. I was hoping Brent DeHart could speak on that a little bit as the person who is really speaking on behalf of Salem, not only to the airlines, but understanding the comprehensive ecosystem of transportation needs within our community. There are a number of individuals, including in the business community, who are going to access commercial air service that may not be quite as vocal or as visible in some of these chats and the like. So Brent, maybe giving us an overview of those who are looking to access the out of town, not just the heading into Salem.
Thanks, Brent.
Yes,
Go ahead.
thank you. Thank you, TJ. Nice to see you, Tom. And I think I said in the chat, it's really not an either or, and really they're not even fair comparisons. In case of like sidewalks and especially transit, they have dedicated funding sources. The airport does not have any outside dedicated funding sources. It is self-generating its own revenue. And as a matter of fact, John was humble about it, but in his budget, he does contribute to the general fund and pays, you know, his percentage for city services like the legal department and the motor pool and administrative services and HR. So the airport is actually contributing to the general fund. And there's no dedicated revenue for this aviation activity. It's actually a very good example, Tom and group, of as a user fee, because we pay all that money the FAA spends, we pay for in our taxes when we fly on an airplane. So this is the users who utilize the airport, in fact, are funding it. You can't, as John Pascal says, you can't take airport generated revenue and move it off site. It's not an either or. We all want nice sidewalks. We all want solutions to homeless. We all want human services, but these are not funds. This is a siloed amount of money and revenue that has to be dedicated to the airport. Very similar to our water and sewer fund. You can't, by statute, take water and sewer rates, and fair enough, and use it on behalf of public safety even, or a library, because it's a dedicated fund for water and sewer. So, boy, I think we all want an outstanding community. I think we all want world-class education and transportation and sidewalks and parks. We all want that. I know the chamber advocates for it. And we need to work in our avenues to get what we can, the best we can for our community. So I guess my statement, Tom, to the question is it's not an either or situation. You know, we want commercial air service. There's a huge, huge contingent in the community for whom this is really important. And the good news is people who don't care about it because they don't travel out of state, they're still going to benefit from the economic development, the viability of our restaurants, the tot funds that people who stay in the community will raise, and so that can be used in our local treasures like Bush House and the Elsinore and so forth. All of these things uplift the entire community. So we really shouldn't be battling. We should be, hey, that's great. I hope you're successful. And hey, it's great. I hope you're successful too. What can we do to help? Does that touch on what you're talking about, Tom? And
I think it's just important that our community realizes that, you know, diversification of transportation options is important, not just for the economic infrastructure, but also to allow people to really come and visit our wonderful place and have some real economic accelerators. So an exciting time, Brent.
One more thing, Tom, which is related. We had a nice conversation with Jose Gonzalez, city councilor. And he had a point we hadn't thought about it. He says, you know, his population that he feels he represents in the Hispanic community, for them, it's really important to have low cost available air service because they have family in California. A lot of them have family. A lot of them are lower economic sector, so they don't have high wages. So to get a low cost carrier that allows them to return to visit family and friends in California or in Central America is important to him. And it's us, and we had not thought in terms of this sector, but he's like, very much so. It's going to be important to us for equity reasons to have access to a carrier that we can afford, that can allows us to have the quality of life and contact with our family and friends, and in some cases, the home where it came from.
I see a question in the chat from Michelle asking about the strategic plan that the airport put together back in 2019. Was there any plan to update that? There isn't a plan to update the strategic plan. There is a plan to update the airport master plan. which will probably happen starting next year, and it'll be about an 18-month process. But that's the facility plan that the airport uses to look at its existing infrastructure and to plan for its future infrastructure and growth. And we will include in there footprints for larger terminals and parking facilities, because we know we'll quickly outgrow these facilities if we get commercial air service. We're pretty confident that when one shows up here, the dominoes will begin to fall pretty quickly. Santa Rosa Airport in California is a perfect example of that. They ended up with terminal constraints and parking constraints and ramp aircraft parking constraints very, very quickly. And they're trying to catch up now to build larger terminals. So we want to be in front of that and have our master plan address some of those things. So the strategic plan probably won't be addressed. There's not really a lot in there that has to do with commercial service specifically. That's more of a business plan. But the master plan will likely change pretty significantly here in the next couple of years. And that's a public process. So there'll be a lot of public meetings, a lot of public outreach, a lot of public participation. So those of you that are interested, certainly be involved in that as we kick that off.
Well, thank you, John, so much for your insight. Jack and Angie and Ed, you guys, this information is so vital to our members and to our community as a whole. Brent, the part that you provided too on just the way in which commercial air service will have for the entire community and the ecosystem is so essential. So if anybody is ever interested in learning how they can be more involved in this effort, you feel free to reach out to me or to Brent or to Tom. We're happy to provide some different opportunities. Thank you guys again so much. Next month, our public policy meeting will still be on Zoom and it'll be on November 4th. We'll send out some information on what that topic is going to be. And with that, we will give you guys a gift of time of 1 minute. So
I want to apologize too. I said Michelle and I realized now it was Michael, but there's a Michelle right in front of me on my screen. So I confirmed. My apologies, Michael.
Well, thank you, John, for that. Everybody have a fantastic rest of your day and continue to do the special things you all do in our community.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.